You are standing in the middle of the ancient world's most powerful civilization, and you have no idea how close you are to dying. The sun is already brutal before the second hour of morning. The air smells of animal dung, river mud, and something rotting that you cannot quite identify. Around you, tens of thousands of people are going about the business of survival inside a society so intricate, so rigid, and so unforgiving that a single wrong word, a single accidental gesture, a single moment of bad judgment could end your life before sunset. Ancient Egypt looks magnificent from the outside. The paintings show gods and pharaohs in golden light, symmetrical and eternal. But you are not in the painting right now. You are in the dust and the heat and the noise of the real thing, and the 5 deadliest mistakes a person could make in this world are not obvious. They are quiet. They are easy. And almost every one of them could happen to someone exactly like you before the day is over. The first mistake does not require any malice on your part. It does not require stupidity or recklessness. All it requires is that you are in the wrong place when a sacred animal crosses your path, and that your instinct to survive overpowers your understanding of where you actually are. Cats in ancient Egypt were not pets in any sense you would recognize today. They were living incarnations of the divine. They were extensions of Bastet, goddess of home, fertility, and protection. And to harm one even accidentally was to commit an act of violence against the divine order itself. We know from Greek historians who visited Egypt that crowds of people witnessed a Roman citizen accidentally kill a cat in the city of Alexandria during the reign of Ptolemy XII. The Egyptians tore him apart in the street, not the soldiers, not the guards, ordinary people. The local authorities did not intervene. The death was considered justified. The punishment was instantaneous and absolute. Now imagine that same scenario, but you are not a foreign diplomat with even minimal protection. You are a nobody, a craftsman, a farmer, a traveling merchant. You hear a sound under your cartwheel. You feel a bump. And by the time you understand what happened, the street has already turned against you. Cats were not the only animals that could get you killed. Abeses belonged to Thoth, god of knowledge and writing. Crocodiles in certain regions belonged to Sobek and were actively worshipped, fed by priests, and ornamented with gold jewelry. Certain bulls in Memphis were identified as the physical body of the god Ptah and lived inside temples, attended by their own staff. Harming any of these creatures, even in self-defense, even in ignorance, was a capital offense in the most literal sense. The reverence was not symbolic, it was juridical. And the enforcement was social, which made it far more immediate and far more lethal than any court system. By the time a court could even convene, the crowd had already rendered its verdict. The second mistake is one you could make while simply trying to eat. Food in ancient Egypt was not just food. It was a map of identity, status, and sacred obligation. And violating that map could mean death in ways that ranged from official execution to invisible biological annihilation. The Nile was the source of almost everything people consumed, which made it magnificent and catastrophic in equal measure. The river carried fish, waterfowl, vegetables, and fresh water. It also carried parasites that modern science has since identified in the bones and intestines of mummified remains. Organisms that ate through human tissue from the inside over years and decades. Organisms that we now treat with medication you can buy at a pharmacy for a few coins. Organisms that in ancient Egypt had no treatment whatsoever. Schistosomiasis alone, a parasitic infection spread through contact with the same river water used for drinking, bathing, irrigation, and fishing, has been confirmed in multiple Egyptian mummies across different dynasties. The symptoms begin quietly: a rash, fatigue, and abdominal pain. and then progress into organ damage, internal bleeding, and a kind of slow destruction that would have looked to ancient physicians like a curse or a divine punishment. But the invisible biological disaster was only one layer of the second mistake. The other layer was religious. Certain fish were sacred to certain gods and absolutely forbidden for consumption in specific regions. Eating the wrong species in the wrong district could bring you before a tribunal. The pig was considered impure in ways that extended beyond mere preference. Priests who violated dietary restrictions specific to their temple were subject to legal consequences that could include removal from their position, seizure of property, or worse. And if you were a commoner who, out of hunger or ignorance, consumed something that marked you as ritually impure, the social and legal consequences could cascade in ways that destroyed not just you, but your entire household. The third mistake is the one that has destroyed more people in more civilizations than almost any other, and ancient Egypt was no exception. Say the wrong thing about the wrong person in the wrong context, and the state will reach into your life and remove you from it completely. In Egypt, this was not a metaphor. Damnatio memoriae, the erasure of a person's name and image from every monument, record, and inscription, was the ancient world's version of a death that extended beyond the body. The soul, the ka and the ba, required the preservation of the name to survive the afterlife. To have your name chiseled out of stone, painted over, and removed from the official record was to be killed twice, once in the body, once in eternity. Pharaohs did this to rivals, to disgraced officials, to predecessors whose legacy threatened the current dynasty's legitimacy. Hatshepsut, one of Egypt's most powerful rulers, had her own name systematically removed from monuments after her death by Thutmose III. Akhenaten was erased with such thoroughness that later Egyptians referred to his reign as the time of the criminal, but this kind of institutional erasure was not reserved for pharaohs. Officials who fell out of favor, scribes who wrote the wrong documents, courtiers who aligned themselves with losing factions in palace power struggles, all of them could disappear from the record with frightening efficiency. For ordinary people, the danger was different, but equally real. Egypt had a sophisticated legal system, complete with courts, witnesses, written contracts, and official verdicts. But that system was administered by a bureaucratic class whose loyalties ran upward, not outward. A false accusation from a more powerful neighbor, a dispute over land rights, a misunderstanding during a census. Any of these could trigger a legal process that ordinary people had almost no tools to resist. Imprisonment in Egypt meant labor camps in the mines of Nubia or the quarries of the eastern desert, places where men were worked until they could no longer stand, where the sun was a weapon, where water was rationed, and hope was not part of the administrative vocabulary. The fourth mistake is so mundane that you would never see it coming. You would simply get sick and then, very quickly, get dead. The medical knowledge of ancient Egypt was genuinely advanced compared to most of the ancient world. Physicians understood wound care, bone setting, and certain surgical interventions with surprising sophistication. The Edwin Smith Papyrus describes clinical observations of brain injuries that would not be matched in recorded medical history for nearly 3,000 years. But the limits of that knowledge were catastrophic. Infection was not understood as a biological process. Fever was treated with spells and animal fat and onion poultices. Tooth decay, which was nearly universal in ancient Egypt because grain was ground on stone surfaces that left silica particles in the bread, caused abscesses that reached the jaw, spread to the bloodstream, and killed people who by every other measure were healthy and functional. Archaeologists have examined thousands of Egyptian skulls and found evidence of dental disease so severe it would today be considered a medical emergency at the stage where ancient Egyptians were simply trying to continue eating. Imagine something you do every morning, brushing your teeth, standing over a clean sink with treated fluoride water, and then imagine that without that 2-minute ritual, your teeth would begin destroying you by the time you reached your 30s. That was not a dramatic scenario in ancient Egypt. That was Tuesday. Beyond the teeth, diarrheal disease killed children in enormous numbers. Malaria was endemic to the Nile Delta region. Eye infections caused by flies, dust, and contaminated water led to widespread blindness that was treated with mixtures including cow dung, and the average life expectancy for someone who survived childhood was not much beyond 40 years. The healers were skilled and earnest. They simply had no way to fight what they could not see. The fifth mistake is the one that closes around you slowly, like the heat itself, until the moment you realize you were already inside it. It is the mistake of being poor in a society built on the absolute concentration of resources at the top, of misunderstanding your own position inside a hierarchy so rigid and so cosmically justified that challenging it was not merely illegal, but theologically impossible. The pharaoh was not a king who happened to have religious authority. He was the living intermediary between the human world and the divine order, the axis around which the entire universe was organized, the single point of contact between cosmic truth and earthly reality. Every grain stored in the state granaries, every stone cut by every laborer in every quarry, every fish pulled from the Nile in every village, existed ultimately as part of a system designed to maintain that axis. Taxation was not a civic contribution, it was a cosmological obligation. And for the vast majority of people who built this civilization with their hands and their bodies, the reward for that contribution was survival, when the floods cooperated, when the harvest was sufficient, when disease did not reduce the household, when the local official did not decide that your allocation was more useful elsewhere. The workers who built the pyramids were not slaves in the way later historical myths suggested, a distinction that modern archaeology has spent considerable effort clarifying. They were organized labor, fed and housed by the state, and in some cases clearly proud of their contribution to divine works. But the records of their lives, the skeletal remains, the written grievances discovered in workers' villages, and the physical evidence of arthritis, spinal compression, and healed fractures in their bones tell a parallel story. Their bodies paid for those monuments in ways that never appeared in the official paintings, never made it into the hymns carved on temple walls, never entered the mythology that later generations inherited as the face of ancient Egypt. That face was beautiful and geometric and enduring. What it hid was 5,000 years of ordinary human beings making ordinary human errors inside a system designed to ensure they had no margin for any of them. The next time you open a tap and clean water comes out without ceremony, without permission, without the right lineage or the right prayers or the right moment in the flood cycle, remember what it took to reach that moment. The distance between you and ancient Egypt is not just centuries of time. It is the entire weight of everything those people endured, everything that killed them before they were 40, everything that ground their teeth to nothing and broke their spines and erased their names, and everything that they built in spite of all of it, which makes the question impossible to escape: which civilization in history would reveal the largest gap between its magnificent image and its brutal daily reality? Leave your answer in the comments. There are entire worlds buried under beautiful ruins, and not all of them have been opened yet.